I know you can't sleep without one more crime story. So dim the lights, get comfortable, and let me take you into something strange, and dark, and real. This story begins in Amos, Iowa. A college town, peaceful, small, the kind of place where people leave their doors unlocked and children walk to school on their own. But in May 2015, something happened that made parents lock their windows twice. And it started, as so many horror stories do, in the middle of the night. It was around 1:30 a.m. when a girl, just 13 years old, woke up to a sound, something faint, like scratching. Maybe it was just the wind, but it wasn't. A moment later, she heard it again, and this time, she knew it was coming from the basement window. What she saw when she looked down would stay with her forever. A man, tall, dark-skinned, with a hoodie pulled tight over his head, was trying to pull her little brother through the window. The boy was just 5 years old. The sister screamed. The man fled. But not before the girl saw his face. Police responded quickly. The town was shaken. A man had broken into a home, tried to abduct a child, and escaped into the night. That man was Akuk Akok, 17 years old. Now, here's where the story gets strange. Because Akok wasn't a random drifter. He wasn't an escaped convict. He was a local high school student, a star athlete. Tall, lean, fast, a basketball standout with dreams of playing college ball. He lived nearby. He had friends, a life, a future, and for reasons still unclear to this day, he tried to take a child out of his bed in the middle of the night. When police found him, he was hiding in a basement just a few blocks away. He resisted, fought officers, and eventually, they subdued him. He was arrested and charged with first-degree burglary and assault with intent to commit sexual abuse. Now, let's pause for a second. Because if this story ended here, it would be horrifying enough, but it didn't. While in custody, Akok was involved in 2 more attacks, this time on other inmates. He was later convicted of 2 separate assaults with intent to commit sexual abuse against men. The same boy who once smiled in a school yearbook photo now had 3 serious convictions on his record before he turned 20. At his hearings, Akok didn't show much emotion. He denied any sexual motive, claimed he didn't remember parts of the night. Some in the courtroom said he looked dazed, like he wasn't fully there. But the facts were hard to ignore. He entered someone's home. He tried to pull a 5-year-old boy from a basement window. He later assaulted other men in custody. This wasn't a one-time mistake. This was something darker. And yet, there was no trial, no public testimony, no psychological evaluations made public. Akok took a plea deal. He was sentenced and quietly disappeared into the prison system. You won't find many headlines about him, no documentaries, no Dateline specials. But if you look deep enough, you'll find whispers, court records, and people in Iowa who still double-check their locks before they sleep. Because the scariest monsters aren't the ones on the news. They're the ones you thought were just like you. Normal, safe, human. If you've made it this far, tell me what you think in the comments. Would you have done anything differently? Have you heard of this case before? And if you're still with me, you know what to do. Subscribe. I've got more stories to tell. And I know you'll be back for them. Until then, sleep well. If you can. Akuk Akok had no criminal record before that night. No signs, no police reports, no whispers of violence or cruelty. He wasn't an outcast. He wasn't someone the neighbors were afraid of. In fact, most people in his school knew him as quiet, focused, maybe even shy. He kept to himself, but he wasn't threatening. If anything, he was just normal, forgettable. That, of course, is what made the truth so much more terrifying. After his arrest, the news coverage was minimal. Local papers ran a few short pieces: attempted abduction, teen arrested. No photos, no deep dives, just facts, names, dates. And then it all went quiet. In Amos, people still talk about it in hushed tones. Parents remember the fear, that sudden shift from comfort to caution. For weeks, children weren't allowed to sleep with their windows open. Parents walked their kids to school again, like they were in kindergarten. Alarm systems were installed, dogs adopted, trust was shaken. But beyond that, nothing. Akok's trial didn't make national news. There was no viral outcry. No psychological profile released to the public. What he did in jail, The attacks on fellow inmates were barely covered, and the question lingers, why? What drives a 17-year-old to try to steal a child from their bed? Why go through the basement? Why wait until the family was asleep? Why run after being seen if it wasn't meant to be violent? Some speculated mental illness. Others whispered about repressed urges, unaddressed trauma, or dangerous fantasies. But officially, no motive was ever confirmed. Let me tell you what did happened. In the courtroom, Akok pled guilty to multiple counts: first-degree burglary, attempted sexual assault. He also admitted guilt into separate incidents while in custody, both involving sexual aggression toward other inmates. He didn't apologize. He didn't explain. He didn't cry. The judge sentenced him to prison. The exact length, unclear. Some reports cite a 25-year combined sentence. Others say less, due to plea deals and concurrent terms. And just like that, he vanished into the system. No public database lists his current location. His face rarely appears in connection with this crime. And unless you lived in Amas in 2015, you probably never heard his name. But the family he tried to hurt, they never forgot. The boy he tried to drag through that window? He's a teenager now. He still lives in Iowa. He still sleeps with the shades closed. And his sister, she's the reason he's still alive. Her scream that night may have saved his life. She testified quietly, without tears, and has since refused interviews. She said one thing to reporters: "I just did what I had to do." And that ... says everything. To understand what happened in that basement window, we need to go deeper than police reports. Because sometimes, the most chilling truths aren't written in statements or transcripts, they're etched in silence. Akuk Akok's behavior has drawn comparisons to other cases involving young offenders whose crimes seem disconnected from their public personas. He wasn't a serial predator, at least not on record. But what happened points to a pattern: premeditation, escalation, and boundary testing. Criminal psychologists have long noted that some offenders begin with so-called fantasy rehearsals, small violations that test risk and control. Looking into windows, lingering near playgrounds, trying doorknobs at night. If the fantasy isn't stopped, it grows. What we know: Akok didn't stumble onto that house by chance. He knew there were children inside. He chose the basement window. He struck at a time when the family would be most vulnerable. And when he was caught, he ran. But later, behind bars, he didn't stop. His assaults on inmates were not random outbursts. They were targeted, intentional acts, quiet violence. One prison staff member, who spoke anonymously to a local paper, described him this way: "He never raised his voice, he never made threats. But you always had the feeling that he was calculating something, watching, waiting." That kind of silence is what terrifies psychologists, because it isn't about rage. It isn't even about opportunity, it's about control. In many ways, the Akok case shows us what it looks like when someone dangerous goes unnoticed until it's too late. It's a reminder that not all monsters growl. Some of them whisper, some of them smile, and some of them blend in perfectly until the moment they don't. When this case is discussed in psychology forums or lectures, it's often used as a case study in missed signs. A young man with no record, a public image that didn't match the crime, and a system that still doesn't fully understand why it happened. Was it impulse, a break from reality, suppressed desire, or something deeper? And here's the part that never makes headlines. Most offenders like Akok are never caught the first time. That means what happened that night in Amas may not have been a beginning. It may have been an escalation, but because of one girl's scream, it became an ending instead. In small towns, trauma echoes longer. People in Amas still talk about that spring. Quietly, usually, a mention in a PTA meeting. A cautionary story at the dinner table, a reason not to let your kids ride bikes after dark. When a crime like this happens in a city, it becomes a headline. But when it happens in a place like Amas, it becomes part of the town's DNA. It lives in the sidewalks. It lingers in playgrounds. It lives in the parents who never stopped locking the windows at night. There were no community memorials, no marches, no press conferences, but there was fear. And in towns like Amas, fear is a private thing. It shows up in changed routines, in shortened leash lengths, in porch lights left on all night. Schools updated their safety training. Some families quietly moved away. And others, like the victims, stayed, trying to reclaim a sense of peace in a place that would never fully feel safe again. Neighbors who once waved stopped doing so. Strangers looked a little stranger. A collective innocence had cracked. The media left quickly. But trauma doesn't follow deadlines. It lingers, especially when answers never come. Akok never gave the town a reason. He never spoke publicly. No statement, no motive, nothing. And maybe that's why this story matters. Because it's a reminder of how thin the line is between ordinary and unthinkable. How danger doesn't always come with warning signs. Sometimes it slips in through the basement window. And sometimes, you only realize what happened when it's almost too late. There's a kind of silence that settles over small towns after something like this. Not the silence of peace, but the silence of questions no one knows how to ask out loud. What happens to a community when justice feels hidden behind courtroom deals and sealed evaluations? What happens when someone dangerous disappears into the system, but no one tells you if he's getting help or just waiting? Akuk Akok was sentenced. He served time. But there are no interviews, no psychological profiles, no formal explanation of what made him break into that house. Was it mental illness, repressed rage, a history of abuse? Or was it something darker, something society doesn't want to admit exists in kids from good homes? We may never know. What we do know is that a 13-year-old girl saved her little brother's life. That her scream stopped something much worse. That bravery doesn't always come in uniforms. Sometimes it comes from someone still wearing braces. And we know this. Sometimes the most dangerous people don't come in masks. They don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they smile. They go to school. They play sports. And no one sees it coming. That's the part that sticks with you. If this story made you pause, say something in the comments. Let me know your thoughts. What does justice mean in a case like this? What do we do with someone like Akok, someone who did something unforgivable at 17? And if you're still with me, thank you. Subscribe if you haven't already. I'll be here next week, same time, same voice. Different nightmare. Until then, sleep well, if you can.